Jonathan Taylor has been great right now. In fact, he has now put himself where he's got 603 yards to lead the NFL in rushing yards right now. All right, welcome to Just the Stats NFL, the show that covers the top 10 players in the NFL currently as well as all time. We look at players from the past as well as what's going on in this very week of the NFL. So I've been doing this podcast a little while, and it's changed completely from when I started to where I am today. It's changed quite a bit, trying to figure out what I like and so forth. I do like the stats. I like the top 10s. I think that's the area where I'm going to focus. Each episode will be the top 10s. Whatever I happen to be looking at that day, we'll cover like the top 10 players each week, especially right after the Sunday and Monday games. We'll look at who the top 10 players are in different categories. Look at the season numbers, who's leading the NFL over the whole season in different categories. We'll look at the standings, who's winning, so forth. Look at the teams, what teams are doing well, what teams are in the top 10 in various categories like most points, most penalties, negative or positive stats. And then any other thing I might come across, like what the top 10 rookies might be. And we'll cover each day, Monday through Friday. I'll cover something in a period of about 25 to 30 minutes, and we'll try to make it slow down the pace a little bit. I feel like I talk like 100 miles an hour. I can slow that down, be a little more casual, more conversational. At some point, I would like to make this show live. So if anybody happens to want to chime in. So my hope is at some point probably to have this show start, say, sometime in the morning every day at the same time. So if anybody wants to chime in, they know what time the show will be on. So that's what I'm looking at doing. Now, I haven't got that far yet. If you happen to catch the last two podcasts, if you're watching it on YouTube now, the last two podcasts, which I did yesterday, I kind of cut them in half. One was like 18 and one was 22. I probably could have almost done them together, but I did throw in charts for the first time. So if you're watching it, it's not just me all the time. You'll see charts. So like when I was talking about for week 6, the top 10 passing leaders in yards, for example, a chart will pop up as I'm talking about that, and you can actually see the numbers. So because I don't necessarily read off everybody in the top 10, I talk about maybe the top couple that are interesting. And the same goes when I talk about, so what I do is I'll talk about what the top 10 players say were in week 6 in passing yardage, for example. And then I'll compare that to the rest of the weeks, the past 5 weeks, and we'll see if any of the numbers from this past week, like say in week 6, was good enough to make it into the top 10 for the season as far as on a weekly basis. So then I'll go to that chart, and that chart will pop up, and I'll highlight who the players were from week 6 that were able to make it in the top 10, if there were any. And usually, every week somebody can break into the top 10 in some category. Just depends on the category and how the games went. So like last week, there were only 2 players that threw for over 300 yards. The previous week, I believe there was like 5 or 6. So, that makes a difference sometimes. So that's something. So you'll start seeing charts. Now, I only was able to do that for the week 6, those 2 podcasts. I won't do that today. I'm going on another vacation, leaving tomorrow morning. So while I'm on vacation, I'm going to try to make up these charts. It takes time to do the charts, to create them. Once I have them created, though, then it's just a matter of simply filling in a new name into the list that's currently there. So that doesn't take long. It's just the actual initial creation of the lit chart. So that's something I'll work on in the next week. And hopefully next week I can throw in another chart maybe for the next podcast like say the season top 10 players in seasonal category, whatever category is, and on a season level. So for the 2025 season. So anyway, that's what I'm working on as well. So today we're going to look at the top 10 season leaders. So I did this last week. So one of the things I'll look at in the time that we have here is comparing who's in the top 10 last week and who dropped out, and maybe who was jumped into the top 10. And we'll do it that way. I think that'll be kind of interesting to see who is hanging in there and so forth. So why don't we get started with top 10s today? And that is this season's 2025 season, the top 10 players in different categories. So we're going to start with the quarterbacks, and we'll do the quarterback rating. And still, it's Lamar Jackson. He hasn't played for the last 2 games. He has a bye week this week, so he won't play this week as well. I don't know how many, when he would drop out of the official list. You have to have a certain amount of, attempts and so forth, and he still qualifies. So right now he has a quarterback rating of 130.5, which is 10 points better than the next player, which is Jared Goff, who has 120.6. It's barely changed at all. Sam Darnold did go up almost 1.2 points up to number 3 with 116. He was number 3 last week too, but the big mover was Drake May, who went from 107.8. He was 6th last week to 4th with 112.5 to move into 4th. Pretty impressive move on his part. He's really, when I'm looking at this list, he's really the big mover on the list. Now, let me see if there's anybody else. Nobody else has really moved a whole bunch. It looks to me like basically almost the same players are in the top 10 that were before. The one that is new is Dak Prescott, jumped into the top 10 this week. I see Baker Mayfield moved from 9th to 6th. He increased from 104.4 to 108.5, so that was pretty impressive. I'm just looking to see who. Josh Allen dropped. He's the big drop. He dropped from 5th at 108.4 all the way down to 11th with 103.1. So he dropped out. Dak Prescott jumped in. Dak Prescott, like I said, jumped into the top 10, just barely making it in there, but he is in. All right, let's look at the passing yards. But still, Matthew Stafford. The big difference, though, is last week he had 1,503 yards, so he was averaging just over 300 yards a game, which would put him on a record pace. Well, that slowed down dramatically. He only had 181 yards last week, so he still leads the NFL because he had a 150-yard lead on the second place Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott closed that up pretty good. So Matthew Stafford has 1,684 yards. Dak Prescott has 1,617. So Stafford has, if I didn't say that correctly, Stafford has 1,684. So anyway, Stafford's lead is shrunk down to just 57 yards over Dak Prescott. Now, they both have a pretty decent lead over Sam Darnold, who's 3rd with 1,541. And it goes down from there for the top 10. Most of the same players in the top 10. The big mover was Justin Herbert, jumped into the top 10. He had fell out of it. As far as passing yards, he's back in there. No, he's not. He's still been in there. I'm trying to see who's. Yeah, like I said, it's pretty much the same people still in the top 10 that were in there before. Not a lot of movement, honestly, except within the top 10. It's kind of interesting. Like Jared Goff is 10th with 1,390, which is 40 yards better than Geno Smith in 11th. So there's somewhat of a gap among the top 10 versus everybody after that. But right now it's Matthew Stafford. And when I'm looking at some of these numbers, I'm just seeing if possibility of somebody setting a record. And right now, the only one that possibly would be Matthew Stafford as far as passing yards. And we'll watch that, especially when he gets halfway. Basically a third of the way now. So, so right now he could still hit 5,000 yards in a season. He's probably, him and Dak Prescott be the only two possible players to do that. All right, passing TDs so far this year. Jared Goff stays in the lead. He had the lead by one over Matthew Stafford, and he had two more touchdown passes this past game. So he's got 14 in 6 games. He's averaging better than two a game, and at that pace, well, that's going to put him at, well, definitely over 30, say 35 to 40 range, which isn't enough to break any records. You got to get at least into the 50 to hit 50 to make it into the top three, but he's on a pretty decent pace. Dak Prescott's got 13. He had 3 last week, so he jumped from third up to second. He passed Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford and Baker Mayfield each have 12. So Matthew Stafford only had 1, but Baker Mayfield had 2 to push him up there. So they're the top 4 right now. Then you have several players with 11 and even more with 10. Looking at interceptions, this has been a category where Geno Smith, who should not be at the top of it but continues to stay there. Geno Smith has 10 interceptions. Now, Jake Browning, who didn't play, he's still second with 8. Tua Tagovailoa wasn't even in. Well, he had 4, which put him in a tie with 5 others for 5th. He jumped all the way up to 3rd with 7. He had 3 last week in his game, so not too good there. One of them was very end of the game, it was a wish type of thing to try to get down the field anyway. So, but anyway, he had 3. Joe Flacco, he's got 6. He got back to starting, and he's already up there to 6. So, which is actually what he had last week. So he didn't move any. So he did fine. Trevor Lawrence has 5, which is what he had last week. Bryce Young has 5 now. He moves up. He had 1. And then you have several players, Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, Bo Nix, and Cam Ward all have 4. This is the big difference. One of the trouble I think that the Bills are having is Josh Allen, and their offense had very few turnovers last year. And this year, Josh Allen's already got 4 interceptions. So, it's kind of that negative regression that happens in the NFL. Now, as far as another negative stat, being sacked, well, Cam Ward is just trying to run away with this. He had a 2-sack lead over Cam Ward last week at 19-17. Well, that changed big time. Cam Ward was sacked another 6 times. He's been sacked 25 times already. He is well on his way to possibly breaking the NFL record, which is, I think, 71 to 73, somewhere in there. Sacks, and if he keeps it up, he'll get there. That's unfortunately. Now, Justin Fields leapfrogged quite a few people this game here. He's up to 19. He wasn't even in the top 10. I think he was sacked 9 times last week. So he had 10 in the first 4 games that he played, and then 9 more last week. That's not good. Geno Smith has 18. He had only 2, so he kind of slowed down the pace there. Jalen Hurts has already been sacked 18 times. He was sacked 3. A lot of times for him. And Drake May did pretty well. He's been sacked 18 times, but only 1 last week. So that was a big improvement for him as far as the amount of times he'd been sacked. He'd been on too fast of a pace. So good for him. So those are your top 5 with 18 or more. But like I said, Cam Ward is just running away with it at this point in time. All right, let's look at the rushing this season, see who's in the lead. Well, Jonathan Taylor has been great right now. In fact, he has now put himself where he's got 603 yards to lead the NFL in rushing yards right now. So that's better than 100 yards a game. He's on a pace. So he's on a pace for at least 1,700 yards. Only player even close to that now. James Cook was only 30 yards behind, but now he's 66 yards behind. James Cook has 537 yards rushing. He's second They're only two players even over 500 yards, so they're both doing quite well. John Robinson had a big game. He jumped up to 484 yards. Javonte Williams has 476. He didn't have many yards. He only had like 29 yards the last game, but he'd been on a good pace. He was third last week with 447, so he didn't really do too much. Now the big mover here, Rico Dowdle is fifth with 472 yards so far. He's only started 2 games. He wasn't even in the top 10 last week. He had that 200-yard game a couple games ago, and then he had another 183. He has flew up this list to right now to 5th already. Now, Travis Etienne, who had went from basically from second to third to fourth, and now has dropped to 6th. He's got 470 yards so far. Really didn't have much. He only had 27 yards himself, 28 yards. Actually, I guess 27 yards. Yeah, that's all he had. So, and Derrick Henry finally had another good game. First game, he had 100 yards, well over 100, 69. And then this past game, he went over 100. So he's in 8th. Ashton Genty, the rookie, is in 9th. And Kyron Williams brings up the top 10 with 418 yards. When you throw in Breece Hall in 11th with 410, there's 11 running backs with 400 yards so far. Only 2 with over 500 right now in rushing yards. Now, rushing touchdowns. Another category where Jonathan Taylor is leading the NFL. He's got 7 rushing touchdowns already. He had 1 more. He had 6 last week. He had 1 more. He's up there to 7. And then you have Josh Jacobs with 6. He had 2 more to boost himself up there right behind Jonathan Taylor. And then you have quarterback Jalen Hurts with 5. Several players with 5. Cam Scatterbo being one of them, but he had 3 in one game. So he's been looking quite impressive. James Cook did not have any. Last year he had 16. He's still stuck on 5, which is good enough for tied for 3rd right now. And then you have a bunch of players with 4. So those are your top players right now, but Jonathan Taylor's leading in rushing yards and in TDs. He's looking really good. He's running at a 5.2 yards per carry. So pretty good. All right, let's look at the receivers, not just wide receivers, but just all the receivers. We'll start with receptions. Puka Nacua leads the NFL in receptions right now. He's got 54. That's a big drop-off. He only had 2. So he was on a pace. He had 10 plus, basically 10 receptions a game, dropped well off of that. Running back Christian McCaffrey, 2nd with 46. He had another 7 receptions this past game. So those are your top 2. And then you have Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jake Ferguson both have 44 receptions. Interestingly, on the same amount of targets too, 44 receptions on 51 targets. Big difference is Amon-Ra St. Brown has 452 yards to Jake Ferguson's 305. But obviously one's a wide receiver, one's a tight end, so that kind of explains that. So in your top 4, you've got 2 wide receivers, running back, and a tight end. One of the leading tight ends going into the season was Trey McBride. He's got 37 receptions so far this year, which is good enough to put him in 8th. See if he gets some movement here. Those 37 was good enough to get him into the top 10. He wasn't in the top 10 last week, so he moved up into that spot. One of the big movers here was Jamar Chase. He was 8th last week with 32. He jumped up to 5th. Now he had 10 receptions, so he's up to 42. So Puka Nacua had a bad game. We'll see how not a bad game, but just didn't have that many receptions. We'll see how he does in London this Sunday morning against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Hopefully that's a good game for the Jaguars. As a Jaguar fan, I'm hoping they win, though I do fear Matthew Stafford and his passing game. He is so hard to stop. So we'll just see what happens there. My hope is actually that the Jaguars finally have a good offensive game. And if they have to, they just outshoot the Los Angeles Rams. So we'll have to wait and see. Plus the fact that the Rams have to not only travel across country, also across the ocean. So it's a long trip from Los Angeles to London. So you would think that might be a slight advantage for the Jaguars. All right, so the leader, Puka Nacua, in yards. He's leading in receptions. He's leading in yards as well. And he's still averaging. Actually, he's not leading in yards. I take that back. I'm sorry. It's Jackson Smith-Njigba. 96 yards he's got. Wow. Puka Nacua still has 616. He really didn't have a good game. He had only 28 yards last week, while Jackson Smith-Njigba went well over 100. Those two players right now, though, are still on a pace for more than 100 yards a game. So they're both on a pace for 1,700 plus yards. Very impressive. There's a big lead over the next third place person, which is George Pickens, who's been really good while CeeDee Lamb's been out. He's got 529 yards, 525 yards, I'm sorry. He's third right now. Those are the only three players over 500 yards by quite a bit, actually. And then Emeka Egbuka, the rookie for the Buccaneers, has 469 yards. He didn't have many yards. He only had 24 last week, which is why he didn't move too much. And he was hurt. So we're going to have to see how bad his injury is. Hopefully it's not too bad, but he could really affect his numbers this year. Jamar Chase jumped up quite a bit. He's got 468 yards. And then you have several players in eighth. Christian McCaffrey, the running back, only non-wide receiver on the top 10, actually. He's in eighth with 444 yards, more yards than he has rushing right now. So he's been doing a lot of damage. Well, San Francisco right now, they're very weak in the wide receiver category. And so until they get some wide receivers back, Christian McCaffrey's been doing double duty basically as running back and receiver. All right. Somebody who jumped into the top 10 was Drake London, moved into number 9 spot with 427 yards. So that's a new face in the list. And the person who dropped out was Quentin Johnston, who did not even play. So that dropped him right out of the top 10. All right, let's look at receiving touchdowns, see who's doing well there. And you got a couple of players right now. Amon-Ra St. Brown had 6 going into this past week, and he's stuck there. George Pickens had 5. He got 1 more, so he's tied now for first with St. Brown. They both have 6. Then you have 3 players with 5. Tight end, one of them, Dallas Goedert, with 5. Rome Odunze with 5, but he had 5 last week, so no big deal there. And then Emeka Egbuka also has 5, which he also had last week. So only one mover in this list was George Pickens, and Dallas Goedert was not on the list at all. Interesting that Darren Waller is tied for 6th with several players, actually quite a few, 9, but he's the tight end for Miami. Wasn't even playing last year, actually more than 1 year. He was retired basically. They bring him out of retirement, and he has really started to pick up his game. He only has 10 receptions so far this year, but 4 of them are for touchdowns. So that's a good ratio. Those are your top players right now. Only 5 with 5 or more so far this season. But when you have 6 already, that's a decent pace. Not enough to break into the top 10 all time, but pretty good. All right, that's kind of a look at some of the offensive players here. I did want to, let me get back up this list. I did want to also then look at the running backs. We'll wrap it up with this as far as receiving goes. And right now, Christian McCaffrey dominates this category. Christian McCaffrey has 46 receptions. Devon Achane for the Dolphins has 29. He's the second best as far as running backs receiving receptions. Bijan Robinson has 24. Jamar Gibbs has 23. And then Alvin Kamara has 22, as well as Javonte Williams with 22. So those are your top 6 players. Then you had 4 players with 20. But Christian McCaffrey's running away with this category. And he's pushing all the way up into the top 10 all time in all these categories right now. We'll look at that another time. But looking at the yards so far this season, now his lead is still big, but really there's 2 players. Christian McCaffrey has 444 yards receiving so far, which is a huge lead over Bijan Robinson for the Falcons, who has 338. And then there's a gigantic drop down to Achane for the Dolphins with 195. So big drops from first to second, second to third. The reason Robinson for the Falcons, 338 yards on only 24 receptions. He's averaging over 14 yards a reception, while Christian McCaffrey's averaging 9.7, which is more typical of a running back. Robinson, I believe, had like an 80-something yard one, I think, that might have inflates his numbers somewhat. But those are your top players. I mean, really, it's McCaffrey and Robinson in the yards category, and then Christian McCaffrey alone in the reception category. Same with touchdowns. Christian McCaffrey, Kyren Williams, and Achane for the Dolphins all have 3 touchdowns receiving. Like I said, McCaffrey only has 1 player left to set the all-time record in receiving touchdowns by a running back. So that's a category we'll be looking at. All right, that's some of the offensive numbers. Some of them are starting to look interesting. We'll keep track of these players that could break into the all-time top 10s. There's a few of them. We'll see how Rico Dowdle does, if he can put up another huge number. The way he's been flying up the charts, he's going to give Jonathan Taylor a challenge at that number 1 spot. Right now, no one else is really. Appreciate you listening. Tomorrow, I'll have a new top 10s to talk about, and hope you chime in, watch it. And as I said, I'll be trying to put up some charts as I go along, make it a little bit more interesting. If you're watching it, something you can look at besides my face and my background, whatever that happens to be. Appreciate if you like and subscribe to this podcast. You can find it on YouTube at Just the Stats NFL. Also, you can find it on podcast apps, Apple, Spotify, and any app you use for podcasting. And again, thank you for listening. Please subscribe. And that is a wrap for this episode of Just the Stats NFL Top 10s. I'm out.